All right, welcome back to Problem Solver Politics. I'm your host, Cardin Ellis, with Cody the Oracle.
Hey everyone, how you doing?
And today we got a really controversial subject that we're going to dive into, basically juxtaposing Bernie Sanders originally, but now all of the Democratic candidates push towards a $15 minimum wage versus the UBI, which would be more effective in augmenting the financial situation of our society, of America. Before we dive into the stats, because we love math, making America think harder, and we also think the devil's in the details, the witches are in the niches, and you got to go into the numbers. Before we go into those numbers, quick shout out to the people who have been donating. We had 3 significant donors with some great names that Cody's about to butcher. You want to give them a shout out really fast, Cody?
Of course, really quickly. And again, I really hope I'm getting any of these names wrong. First names only, I don't want to shout one up, but I believe it would be Hyun, Yunhao, and Tua, I believe, or Tao. Sorry if I got them wrong. I really appreciate it,
Well,
though,
if it's
guys.
Tao, it's
Thank you so
pronounced
much.
Tao, I believe, just like the Tao Te Ching, right? The great book of Eastern philosophy.
Like I said, I'm afraid I don't, my knowledge is limited here. But seriously, though, thank you, anyone that has donated.
And send us a link to how to
pronounce.
pronounce your name as well, because that's freaking awesome. Also, we have gotten a significant amount of inquiries and responses to our ask about the hats, and a lot of people are interested. So we're going to order a ton of hats. We got about 100 on order, but we got to pick between charcoal gray and black. So all you guys out there, if you have interest in the hats, why don't you tell us actually what kind you would like to get, whether the charcoal gray or the black looks better, and we're going to put that up on the screen so you guys can see that as well. So anyway, let's dive right in and talk a little bit of capitalism. I don't want to say capitalism versus socialism, but basically $15 minimum wage versus the UBI. Okay. Now, to start things out, we research heavily each one of these podcasts we do. And actually, one of our biggest frustrations is that oftentimes there's so much data that we want to throw at you, but it's too much, because it'd be like trying to drink from a wide open fire hydrant. So we're going to try and simplify this argument as best we can and show you the process through which we go researching what we're going to say in these podcasts. So let's actually just first show up this graphic. And I was a little bit frustrated. Scott Adams has a very good quote where he says, America is now 2 people looking at the same screen with 2 different movies on it. And I believe this is manifest by this screenshot I have. I literally Googled the effects of $15 minimum wage increases, because there's many cities that have actually done it. Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, so on and so forth. And there's been more than a handful of studies that have been done over the past 10 years on what these drastic increases in minimum wage do. But just like Scott Adams says, there's 2 movies going on the same screen. And in this screenshot, you can see CNN.com comes out with an article saying $15 minimum wage won't hurt jobs. Okay. Figures, CNN would be saying that. Below them, minimum wage, quote, an effective tool, end quote, for increasing incomes of older workers by Science Daily. Well, yeah, it'll increase the wage of older workers because it is a mandatory wage increase, but the question is whether or not they will lose their jobs. See, it doesn't matter if a job is $30 an hour if nobody's offering it to you. So finally, the people that actually know money and study markets, Forbes, okay, and we're not Forbes fanboys here, all right, but it's Forbes, okay, says the unintended consequences of raising minimum wage to $15. So we actually read all of these articles just to make sure we're being unbiased. And believe it or not, the Forbes article had 2 studies, academic studies, that were performed that were both in favor of an increase in minimum wage, while the 2 others showed drastic amounts of evidence that would suggest that it was not a good idea. So really quick, let's head to the Forbes article. And this is what I kind of found a little bit funny. Let's go through the opening sentence, and then we'll talk about how this compares to UBI and Andrew Yang's suggestion of the freedom dividend. Quote, this is from Forbes.com. The debate about the effect increases in minimum wage have on employment is ongoing. Some studies find either no or only a small effect, here and here, for example, and they give those 2 studies, while others find significant effects here and here. A study recently published by the American Economic Review provides new evidence that increases in the minimum wage reduce employment in the long run. And for me, this right here just shows the vast media bias, and also, I don't want to say corruption in the academic community, but the effects of minimum wage are really just manifest in this opening sentence. Some studies find either no or only a small effect here and here, for example, while others find significant negative effects here and here. So if the people for a minimum wage increase, at best, when they throw everything they can at their academic inquiry, and the second study that's arguing for minimum wage is from UC Berkeley, who would never in a million years argue against it. Okay.
Well, I don't know. Maybe someone there would argue against it. I wouldn't say just because they're from Berkeley they wouldn't be for UBI.
Yeah, UC Berkeley, the people that allowed Antifa to burn their buildings halfway to the ground.
What is the connection between Antifa and $15 minimum wage? It doesn't make any sense.
UC Berkeley is basically like Portland. It's completely run by SJWs now. Every elected official there is absolutely afraid of them. And in the name of social justice, which does include minimum wage increases, anything can run roughshod. I'm sorry, but the credibility of UC Berkeley is absolutely completely compromised at this point.
But still, I mean, I don't see how it's relevant to the UBI discussion. I don't see how you're...
Well, because we're comparing $15 minimum wage increases like Bernie Sanders and many of the Democrats propose as part of their economic proposals versus Andrew Yang's freedom dividend, which is different. Okay? So anyway, I'm going to jump in and we're going to highlight here the latest study because we always like using the latest data. And this is the most recent study based on data that was collected by the American Economic Review. And if you show up to the article by the American Economic Review, right here, it's pretty interesting. Basically, in a nutshell, they use the A word. Okay? And I'm not going to, decompress a 100-page article or peer-reviewed journal entry. But I will say this, that one of the number one things that they notice and they fear is a long range, when you increase the minimum wage, the biggest word that I see repeated in all of these journal entries is automation. Is that one of the first results is that the young workers are the first adversely affected, okay? And then the older workers, and then basically the job gets automated away. And this was my principal concern and the reason why I want to talk a little bit about minimum wage versus the UBI. Okay, so when you look at this, I'm going to go over the article. It says job killer or job creator. Cody, could you pull up the AEAWEB.org?
No, it's up, man. It's up.
Oh, it's up? Okay, cool. It says job killer or job creator. And in 2012, hundreds of New York City fast food workers walked off the job to demand higher pay. They wanted $15 an hour. It's understandable. It's New York City. I'd want $15 an hour too. Workers from healthcare, education, and other industries soon joined the movement that became known as the Fight for 15. Okay. Critics derided it as a job killer, but let's fast forward. A paper in the September issue of the American Economic Review looks what is likely to happen in 3 cities, Seattle, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, that passed laws increasing the minimum wage to $15. I know because I'm an employer in Los Angeles County, I am required to do the exact same thing. Okay? Look at this graph. It says everything right here. The figure above from their paper shows the predicted changes in the employment rate for each city resulting from the $15 per hour law. The effects vary depending on where someone was along the wage scale, and the employment rate is predicted to drop over 10% for workers earning below $10 per hour in Seattle. Meanwhile, slightly less decline in employment for workers in areas where it's already been hiked, basically. I don't know what it will take to debunk this theory that raising a minimum wage is the way to boost the economy or to help people's lives. Okay? When I was in honors AP physics, I remember there was the first of many big minimum wage hikes, and the kid sitting next to me, Kyle Matter, who ended up going on to play, he was star quarterback of Stanford, I believe it was. He said, "Why are they raising the minimum wage? It just makes the cost of everything else go up." And most studies show that when the cost of everything goes up, groceries especially, and items that are prepared using human labor, such as produce, go up as well. And in fact, the prices go up disproportionately on all these items that poor people have to pay for, that the amount of price increases actually outpaces the amount of wage increases. So minimum wage hikes only affect the poor disproportionately. The owner of the company doesn't hurt. He will always be making the same amount of money. And if he can no longer hire inexpensive labor, especially entry-level labor, we're talking about kids getting their first jobs. The majority of minimum wage workers aren't, single moms that are struggling to get by. The stats showed they're actually first-time entry-level positions, okay? And what happens is the employers automate the jobs away, or the companies just cease to exist. Unfortunately, one of the biggest effects of minimum wage increases is a decline in the amount of companies that are hiring or plain old exist in that industry. And the three biggest industries that are going to be hit and hurt and negatively impacted by minimum wage increases, as most of the Democrats, especially pushed by Bernie Sanders, suggest, is, guess what? Retail. And Andrew Yang has been talking day in and day out how truck driver and retail clerk are the most common jobs getting automated away. So retail is going away. Second most common is food service. We already see those jobs going away. Little Caesars having kiosks, McDonald's having kiosks. Everybody's automating away a Jack in the Box. The purchase of drinks, you just go get them and a robot fills your cup now. And the third, which I found was interesting, affected by minimum wage increases, was 8% of healthcare workers would be affected by minimum wage increases. And I didn't know exactly if that was because of entry-level nursing or what, but I didn't dive into those stats. So anyway, in a nutshell, an increase in minimum wage sounds great as a populist message. Might even get people to the polls, and you can have warm fuzzies saying, don't people deserve to work more? And just like Barack Obama said, I don't believe somebody who's working full time should not be able to pay their bills. Okay. But the question is, what's the vehicle to get it to where anybody that's working full time and contributing to our society can pay their bills? The question is it better to have a minimum wage increase or to introduce the UBI? So I suggest minimum wage increase is a minimum wage increase. Sounds great at best. I think at worst, the people pushing it are just grifters and are political opportunists, and I can't stand them. Okay. But I think there's plenty of good people that have a misdirected faith in minimum wage increases who, upon educating themselves about their effects, would disabuse themselves of the idea. But you can't enact a criticism, I believe, without giving a replacement. And I believe that replacement, Cody, tell me where I'm going wrong here. I believe that replacement is UBI. Where am I going wrong, Cody?
I don't know if you're going wrong anywhere. I do think one thing that's kind of interesting to point out, if you just do kind of the simple numbers before taxes, if you were to work 40 hours a week at $15 an hour for 4 weeks, you would make $2,400 a month.
Okay.
So if you're making roughly $6 or $7 an hour right now, that is the only time it would be a bigger increase in your monthly wages going from that to 15 than going from whatever you make now plus 1,000, if that makes sense. The gap between what $8 an hour at 40 hours a week. Sorry about that. When you combine those numbers, the gap's going to be lesser. The idea is that minimum wage is going to increase workers' salaries across the board greater than $1,000 a month. I don't know about that. Then the other thing that also you're bringing up as well.
The UBI doesn't threaten jobs.
Well, that's what I want to point out. There's a graph I pulled up here from an article by, I believe, Scott Santens. Scott Santens. And it's a graph that shows the oil and gas industry's employees and the rig count. And I mean, and it's actually a little bit frightening when you look, for whatever reason, July, June 2016, the employee count was hitting an all-time low while the rig count just started to spike. And it's the rig count's almost as high as it's ever been while the employees are lower than they've ever been, which is interesting. You wonder, how could they do that?
Sounds like automation to me.
Exactly. Well, Scott Santens is a big UBI automation guy. But idea being, though, if the jobs are going away, it isn't addressed by minimum wage. I think that's one of the big arguments pushing for a UBI against a minimum wage increase, is because if the argument is the jobs are leaving, it doesn't matter how much they hypothetically could pay. Well, so that is definitely the big pushback against it. At the same time, also, the one thing that I look at, where we live in Los Angeles, the $15 minimum wage, I believe we're going to be there anyway in about a year.
Yeah, and I can tell you guys, I am an employer. Okay? When I started my company, minimum wage was $8 an hour, and it completely changes the mindset. I'm not some employer fat cat that wants to pay the least amount possible to my guys. No, I love my guys. They're awesome. They're my brothers in arms. And when it comes to trying to get these difficult jobs done in the hot summer, okay? We're all in this together. But at the same token, I recognize if I need 5 guys for an increase in my business during the summer, I got to hire 10. Because 2 of them are going to end up getting accepted to that trade school they didn't know they were going to get accepted to. One of them's grandma is going to die and is going to have to move out to go and assist with her estate over the summer. You know, life is going to happen to 2 more, and I'm only going to end up with 5. And then those 5, once they've gone through training at minimum wage, will basically have learned the craft, gotten their license, gained a month or 2 of experience, and then I can bump them up in their pay to where they really deserve to be around $20 and $25 an hour. But as minimum wage has slowly hiked up, along with it has come all kinds of other things like, you know, guaranteed medical leave pay and other crazy rules that California has. But as the minimum wage increase goes up and up and up, I find myself at the beginning of the summers not thinking, well, let me hire 10 trainees. I start thinking, ooh, maybe I should only hire experienced guys so I don't need to have that whole training process, because that training process is really expensive now. And it also makes it so that once guys get hired and do get trained, they don't get as big a bump. Since I've already spent the first 3 months paying them $15 an hour now, I don't feel like bumping them up to $25 an hour. I kind of got to get work out of them in order to recoup those losses. And in the long run, they don't get paid as much because my guys with the most amount of experience, it hurts them because for every 1 guy that stays on experienced, I have to go through 2 or 3 inexperienced guys that, who knows, they figure out the job's not for them, attrition happens, whatever. And my heart breaks for the youth of America, because when I was a kid, man, it was a mad rush when you turned 14 or 15 to go get a food services job for minimum wage over at Magic Mountain, because Magic Mountain would hire you for the summer. And then if you got a job, you know, there, the next summer you might be able to work and be a lifeguard or whatever, because you had to be 16. But now, look at our economy. You can't get a job as a 14 or 15-year-old. Why do you think the African-American youth, there's nothing liberal in a minimum wage increase? Because the people that get hurt the hardest are the minorities. Back in the 70s and the 80s, man, there used to be family-owned shop owners that would just have kids come over after school and say, I'll pay you a couple of bucks an hour. Just sweep up and clean up anything or take out the trash. The parents loved it because they were working their shift until 6 or 7. And on the way home, they pick up their kids from having this 2 or 3 hour a day job that taught them responsibility. They'd make 10 or 11 bucks. The shopkeepers could afford it. For lack of a better term, it was free babysitting that taught responsibility. When you require minimum wage, that mom and pop shop is no longer going to have a couple of high school, after school employees. They're going to skip that, forego that, do it themselves. And now this poor single mom that used to have a son who went and worked for a couple of hours after school is now having to pay and be more strained for childcare. So there's nothing liberal, nothing advantageous, if you look in the grand scale of things, about a minimum wage increase. But UBI, gosh, that improves the situation of an 18-year-old, especially coming from an economically disadvantaged background. If he can enter the world knowing I'm already making $1,000 a month to cover some basic expenses, I'm now going to pursue a job that will help me out in my career, or else, you know, will help me out, whatever these aspirations have. It completely changes the psychology of not just the employee, but also the employer. I'm sorry, I can only speak from anecdotal experience, but the data shows minimum wage increases do little damage at best, lots of damage at worst. UBI, I feel kind of like it's the devil you don't know. Minimum wage is kind of like the devil you do know. UBI is the devil you don't know, but the few places that have enacted something similar, such as the Alaskan pipeline, have noticed great improvements to their economy. The 600,000 people that are getting those $2,000 a year up in Alaska from the oil pipeline aren't becoming a bunch of disinterested, lazy, unimproved individuals. When you raise minimum wage, there's all of a sudden no incentive to work harder for the certifications and the skill sets that will get you more money.
Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true. Like I said,
I shouldn't say there's no incentive. I should say there's far less incentive.
I also think just the idea of a flat $15 minimum wage, like I said, I believe we're going to have $15 minimum wage regardless of what anyone does in 2020 in Los Angeles. And there's people that work 40 hours a week.
I would feel far better.
But my point is this. There are people that are currently struggling at a $15 minimum wage in parts of this country. It'll help some greatly in some parts.
You can't live in Los Angeles on $15 an hour.
My point being, it's not a one-size-fit-all. The reason why I kind of like UBI doesn't seem to be intended to be a one-size-fit-all. It's just you're not the pitch of not starting at 0, starting at 1,000 is basically what it is. Because we still are going to have debates about what minimum wage should be, regardless. But I do think it's hard to say a $15 flat minimum wage across the federal level would have the same impact in some. It's crazy. In some communities, you'd be doubling their income, and others like a 10% increase.
I'll tell you this much right now, Cody. I would fight tooth and nail and become Andrew Yang's campaign manager if he actually said this. I'll increase UBI from 1,000 to 1,500, 1,000 to 2,000, like he has said many times.
Well, I don't know how to pay for that.
And then, VAT tax, pull the numbers.
Well, just keep doing the VAT tax more and more. Like,
more and more. No,
guys, it's just a 47% VAT tax.
He wouldn't
it really
isn't
that bad, you know?
Yeah, he wouldn't even have to do that. I would say if he was actually pubbing, I will push the $1,000 a month UBI and release all minimum wage requirements. I think that would actually be a boost of pure adrenaline to the economy,
or lower greatly. I don't want. I don't like the idea of reducing it. But if there's a floor of like $4.55 an hour,
no, this is why reducing it completely isn't a problem. And I know we got to quit, so I'll make this really fast. There have been multiple studies shown in traffic that people never really drive faster than their sensory organs can stand, and most states have a 65 mile per hour speed limit. But most people naturally want to travel at 73 miles per hour. There's something about 73 miles per hour that's kind of like what our sensory organs can handle and we feel safe with. We think that if we see something jutting out on a freeway or from a highway, like a deer coming in from a football field over there, we feel like we can handle it. So naturally, a human being will drive at 73 miles per hour. So by us having an artificially lower speed limit, we're creating a criminal class for only 7 miles per hour. We would greatly reduce the amount of accidents, the amount of tickets, the amount of law enforcement, the amount of court dates and everything if we would just get rid of the speed limit, because naturally people want to drive around 73 miles per hour anyway. Okay? So I really think that people aren't going to want to go to work for $1 or $2 an hour. So what protections are necessary that aren't natural social norms? People won't work in a voluntary system
the argument
for
is
$2 an hour.
But the argument is theoretically, if enough people weren't offering more than 2, or let's say people,
which is never going to happen.
But I get never going to happen. But why not just have the government say, you're right, it's never going to happen. You have to pay someone like $4.50. Above that, you can.
If he dropped it down to $5 an hour minimum wage, I would be his campaign manager.
Of course, in concert with UBI.
The
idea being that no matter what, you have that 1,000. Again, that realistically, I believe I have to do the math, but I believe that's roughly what you would make with what the federal minimum wage is now. So I just feel like no impact if you did that. But no, I definitely, like I said, I think it's interesting to point out that, $15 minimum wage in some parts of the country is going to be life-changing and like a doubling of your income. In other parts of the country, it's going to be a very kind of slight increase. In parts of the country where it's very expensive to live, California, Southern California, Bay Area, California, very expensive. I don't think $15 an hour is going to be enough in some parts of the country to actually live on that minimum wage. And then I think the discussion needs to be more along the idea is, are people supposed to be living at minimum wage, or should we be doing more as a society to kind of alleviate that?
So basically, since our audience trends generally very young, and Andrew Yang fans are generally very young, I'll cite the last opening sentence from the Cornell University ILR school that did a study on the effect of minimum wage increases. And basically, their estimates indicate, quote, that a 10% increase in the minimum wage causes a decline of 1 to 2% in employment among teenagers and a decline of 1.5 to 2% in employment for young adults, similar to the ranges suggested by earlier studies. So basically, the first to get hit hardest are minorities, the young, as in like youth, and then young adults.
Well, so anyone who makes minimum wage, they're the people hit the hardest. Anyone that is.
Yeah. So we really, I'm a huge fan of UBI. Full disclosure, I think it's 10 times better than anything else we've ever thought of. It's got its roots in conservatism. So the libertarians, the Republicans, the conservatives should be loving this thing. And the drastic effects, both in my personal life and in the studies I've read about minimum wage, have proven to me that it's this insatiable dragon that's never satisfied and only used by people who want to gain political power in the short term at the expense of the economy and their society in the long term. So me, at least, UBI far 110% better than $15 minimum wage. Cody, what do you think?
I just think the biggest way that I look at the difference there is if you kind of look at it as people are supposed to have a job and they go to the job and they work the job and then that's how they feed and clothe themselves. The UBI definitely, I can see why for some people they don't quite see the benefits of it. I believe UBI, I view it more as people who are more capitalism leaning or even just kind of more pragmatic will say, hey, the best way really to kind of lift people out of poverty is give them some money to actually play with to make more money every month. Like make sure you have that $1,000 a month. It's kind of, I don't want to use the gambling necessarily, but it's the same idea, like if you have no chips, you can't make any money in a casino. But if you have some and you throw it out there and you might lose some, like there's this idea. And I think there's this fundamental kind of, so what I'm looking for, kind of, like a coin with two sides. Some people say, no, you're supposed to go to work. You get paid the money from your job to support yourself, and that's it. And some people view the economy, specifically in kind of a more capitalist system, as like a game you could play. And the more money you have to play, the more money you can make. So say, hey, we'll just give people money to play with every month. Let them join the game. Let them, come up to the table and risk it. Let them save up for 6 months, use that $6,000 and start an online business,
One of the most detrimental effects of redlining and Jim Crow laws was discouraging and completely inhibiting the African American community's access to capital. So the UBI is far better at providing that capital to American citizens. So anyway, please let us know what you like, subscribe, share this video, the whole 9 yards. Please interact with us. We'd love to hear what you think about this. If you got any data that supports a different view, we'd love to see you link to it in the description. Let us know if you want charcoal or black merch and hats. And we'll see you guys tomorrow. This is Problem Solver Politics.